She always thought her grandfather was just a quiet old man, gentle, reserved, someone who loved her in his own silent way. But after his funeral, she received a sealed envelope that would unravel a secret no one in the family saw coming. A hidden fortune left only to her, and a trail of clues revealing the love he had spent a lifetime preparing to give. What no one knew was that behind his steady smile, he was also hiding something else, a terminal illness he never told a soul about. And in the end, he didn't just leave her money, he left her a purpose. Enjoy the story. The church was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the walls themselves were mourning. Light from the stained glass windows cast colors on the pews where family and friends sat stiffly, eyes red, hands folded. But she sat alone in the third row, her fingers clutched tightly around the edge of her dress, staring at the casket with a hollow heart. Her grandfather was gone. He had been the only constant in her life, the one who always remembered her birthday, who never raised his voice, who always made her feel seen without needing to say much. When her parents argued, he was the one who took her for walks. When she failed her first college exam, he mailed her a postcard that simply said, "You're allowed to stumble, just keep walking." Now there would be no more postcards, no more quiet glances that said everything, just silence. After the service, people filed out slowly, offering her polite nods, hugs that lasted too long, and murmured cliches. He was a good man. He lived a full life. He's in a better place now. She nodded, thanked them, but none of it landed. None of it made sense. Her world had tilted, and no one else seemed to feel it. It wasn't until later that evening, back at her grandfather's home, that the real shift began. The lawyer was waiting for them in the study. He was a small man with silver-rimmed glasses and a leather briefcase that looked older than anyone in the room. The family gathered around, the uncles, the cousins, her mother, all curious but calm. It wasn't a wealthy family. No one expected much. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading the will. Most of it was as expected. A modest sum left to each child. The house split evenly. The collection of old vinyl records to her uncle, who once shared music with him in the 70s, and then the room paused. "To my granddaughter," the lawyer read, "I leave the contents of the safety deposit box located at West Haven Bank, along with a private letter to be opened only by her, in her presence, and without interruption." There was a silence that stretched across the room like fog. Someone coughed. Her mother blinked. One of her cousins muttered, "Seriously?" But the lawyer continued, "The envelope is here." He reached into his briefcase and handed her a sealed, cream-colored envelope. Her name was written in firm, deliberate handwriting. No, to my dear, no flourish. Just her name. She held it in her lap, suddenly hyper-aware of every eye in the room. "I'll give you privacy," the lawyer said, standing. The others lingered, some curious, some annoyed. But her mother touched her shoulder gently. "We'll wait outside." And then she was alone. She stared at the envelope, her pulse loud in her ears. What could possibly require secrecy in a family like theirs? What could he have hidden? Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded 3 times. "My girl, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer there to say it myself. And if I know you, and I do, you're probably confused. Maybe even overwhelmed. So let me say this first. You were always meant to have this. Everything I left in that box is yours. It always has been. You'll hear whispers, questions, maybe even bitterness. Let them come. This isn't about them. It's about you. About what I always dreamed of, but never thought I'd have. You were the light of my later years. My reason to smile again. And there's something I've prepared for you. Something I hope will show you how much you were loved, even in silence." Her eyes burned. She read it again. Then again. He had left something just for her. Not just money or possessions, but something prepared, something intentional, and he had kept it secret from everyone. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope. Outside, the family waited. Some were pacing, others scrolling their phones, impatient. She stepped into the hallway, clutching the letter to her chest. "What was it?" her cousin asked. She didn't answer, because she didn't fully know yet. But something told her deep in her chest that whatever it was only the beginning. The bank was small, old, and smelled faintly of paper and time. Clara had never been inside before. It sat on the edge of downtown, tucked between a florist and a barber shop, its brick facade faded by decades of sunlight. The woman at the front desk barely looked up until Clara handed over the sealed letter and the document from the lawyer. The woman read it, blinked twice, and then nodded. "This way, please." She led Clara through a quiet corridor and into a private room with gray walls and a single steel table in the center. A few minutes later, she returned carrying a safety deposit box. It was heavier than Clara expected, and colder, like it had been waiting a long time. "Take all the time you need," the woman said, before gently closing the door behind her. Clara sat there, alone with the box and her heartbeat. She took a deep breath, then used the small brass key that had been taped to the back of her grandfather's letter. The lock clicked open with a sharp metallic sound. The lid creaked, and inside, neatly arranged, were 3 items: a sealed envelope, a small black lockbox, a leather-bound journal with her name written on the cover in her grandfather's careful handwriting, to Clara. She opened the envelope first. Her hands shook as she unfolded the documents. At the top was her name. Below it, a bank statement, a personal account, balance, $3,000. Clara blinked. Read it again. $3 million. It didn't make sense. She kept reading. The money had been deposited over the years, slowly and methodically. Her grandfather had been planning this for decades, quietly, without telling a soul. Why? She turned to the lockbox. A tiny key had been slipped into the envelope. She opened it carefully, unsure of what to expect. Inside were several heirloom pieces, an antique sapphire ring, a silver brooch with a faded photograph inside, and 2 delicate gold bracelets. Each had a name engraved. One said Clara, the other said Sophia. Her heart clenched. Sophia was the sister she never knew, the baby her mother had lost before Clara was born. She'd only ever heard her name whispered, mentioned in sad fragments. Her grandfather had made bracelets for both of them. One for the granddaughter he raised, and one for the granddaughter he never got to meet. Clara held the bracelets in her palms and closed her eyes. How could someone so quiet have loved so loudly in silence? Then she picked up the journal. It smelled like cedar and ink. She opened the first page. The handwriting was steady, familiar, filled with affection. "Clara, my girl, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I hope I went with peace. And I hope you feel none of the sadness I carried with me. You were my light, Clara. You were the second chance I never thought I'd get. I wasn't the father I wanted to be. But when you were born, I saw something in your eyes that made me believe I still had time to do something right." She turned the page. "I didn't know how to say it. I wasn't raised to show emotion. But you made it easy to feel things again. You reminded me what kindness looks like, what patience is, what love can become when it's given room to grow." Every page that followed was a story, a memory, a moment he had written down just for her, like the time she fell asleep on his lap during a thunderstorm, and he stayed frozen in place for hours because he didn't want to wake her, or how he once drove 3 hours just to pick up a limited edition book she wanted, only to pretend he'd found it, by accident, at a yard sale. Each entry was filled with quiet love and deep regret. He didn't mention the money, not once, because the real gift was the writing, the record of his love, the proof of his presence, the legacy of everything he never said out loud. Clara sat in the gray room for what felt like hours, reading, rereading, letting the words wash over her like waves. She thought about the arguments her family used to have, the silence between her grandfather and her uncles, the way her mother cried in secret but never let anyone see. He had seen it all, and he had chosen, quietly, to build something different. For her. When she finally stood up, she felt changed. Not because she was suddenly wealthy, but because she was finally seen. The box didn't just hold valuables, it held intent. It held love, carefully packed and patiently preserved. And as Clara walked out of the bank, the sky above her cracked open with light, because her grandfather hadn't just left her money, he'd left her something far rarer, a purpose. The journal became Clara's constant companion. She carried it home from the bank tucked inside her coat, as if it might crumble in the wind. That night, instead of scrolling her phone or putting on a movie to fill the silence, she made tea, sat by her bedroom window, and opened to the second page. It wasn't written like a diary, not exactly. There were no dates, no traditional entries. Just thoughts. Clear, sometimes raw, often poetic in their simplicity. It was less a record of events, and more a confession stretched across time. She turned the page. Clara, I suppose I should start by telling you something I've never told anyone. I wasn't a good father. I know your mother might disagree. She defends me. But I see the truth in her eyes when she thinks I'm not looking. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't absent. I was just distant. I thought providing a roof and discipline was enough. I didn't know how to say I'm proud of you, or I'm sorry. I thought love was shown in structure. I see now that it wasn't. I missed so many chances to hold my children closer, and by the time I realized it, they'd stopped reaching out. Clara ran her fingers across the ink. She thought of her mother, of the way she always changed the subject when someone brought up her childhood. She thought of the quiet tension at family dinners, of how her grandfather rarely spoke when the whole family was present, but always pulled her aside after. He was soft with her, gentle, present. But then you came along. The next page read, You were so small, so loud, so full of questions. And somehow, when I held you for the first time, I felt something inside me soften that I didn't know was still hard. You looked up at me like I was important. Not because of what I did or didn't say, but just because I was there. And I made you a promise right then, silently, in my head, that I wouldn't fail you like I failed them. Clara exhaled shakily. So many things began to make sense. She remembered moments that now took on a different meaning. How he'd drive her home from school and let her pick the long way. How he'd always bring her 2 pieces of candy, never 1, never 3, because she once told him that 2 was the perfect number. She remembered the way he always listened, even when she rambled, even when no one else did. I started putting money aside when you were 5, another page said. At first it was just coins. Later, small deposits. I didn't know how much I'd be able to leave you. I just knew I wanted you to have something that no one could ever take away. Not just security, but proof. Proof that someone, somewhere, had planned for your happiness. She turned more pages. Some were filled with stories from his past. How he met her grandmother. How they built their home with their own hands. How he cried when she died. But only in the garage where no one could see. Other pages were about Clara. He wrote about the time she broke her arm falling from a tree and didn't cry until she saw the look on his face. He wrote about the letter she wrote to him when she was 12, thanking him for always showing up. You don't know this, he wrote, but I kept that letter in my wallet. Still have it. It reminded me, on hard days, that I was doing something right, that even if I didn't fix the past, I was shaping the future. She closed the journal for a moment and rested it in her lap. The words weren't dramatic, they weren't grand, but they were deeply real. They were a man's quiet attempt to atone, not through apology, but through action, through preparation, through presence. And Clara realized something that made her throat tighten. Her grandfather hadn't left her a gift. He'd spent the last 20 years building one, page by page, dollar by dollar, memory by memory. She opened the journal again and flipped to the final pages. Only a few left, nearly filled now with the weight of everything he never said out loud. I know this won't fix everything, One of the last entries began, "But I hope it helps you understand me, not as a man who died, but as one who tried. I didn't always know the right words. I didn't always get things right, but I never stopped loving you, not for a moment. You gave me something I never thought I'd have again, the chance to matter, and for that, I owe you everything I have." Clara closed the journal, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. It was no longer just a book. It was a window, a final conversation, a bridge between regret and redemption. Her grandfather hadn't left her behind. He had left her at the center of everything he did, and somehow, even in his absence, he was still showing up. Clara hadn't meant to start crying in the middle of the grocery store. It happened in the cereal aisle, of all places, when she saw the red box of raisin bran her grandfather used to eat every morning. He always added a spoonful of honey and a splash of cream, claiming it was the breakfast of thinkers. As a child, she used to roll her eyes. Now, the sight of that box sent a lump straight to her throat, because now she understood. The memories that once felt ordinary were anything but. She left her cart and sat in her car for 20 minutes, staring out the windshield, letting the flood of recollections rush in. Every scene came back with new meaning, the way he always tied her shoelaces twice, once neatly and then a second time in a double knot, just to keep her grounded. The way he insisted on walking her home from school, even into her teenage years, never out of suspicion, but simply to talk. The strange way he'd save every one of her birthday cards, tucking them into books, drawers, even his wallet. The old gumball machine he fixed for her in the garage, which, at the time, she thought was just a toy. He had once said, "Sometimes the things we fix are the things that remind us we still can." Clara had brushed these off for years as quirks. Now she saw them for what they truly were. Messages, intentions, threads in a tapestry he'd been weaving, in silence. Later that evening, she found herself digging through her own memory box, a cardboard container she had kept beneath her bed since college. Inside, ticket stubs, Polaroids, a friendship bracelet from camp, and tucked near the bottom, an old letter. It was a folded piece of notepaper with her name written in pencil. Clara Jean. She unfolded it slowly. "You are so much more than you think you are. One day you'll look back and realize you were strong, even when you didn't feel it. That you lit up rooms even when you thought you were invisible. That people, especially me, saw you when you didn't see yourself. Never forget that, my girl. Love always, Grandpa." She'd forgotten he'd written it. She must have been 12 or 13. Back then, it felt like something sweet. Now it felt like prophecy. The next morning, she drove to his house. It had been empty since the funeral. The air inside was still. The faint smell of pipe tobacco and cedar lingered in the hall. She wandered through each room slowly, her fingertips grazing the backs of chairs, the door frames, the edge of his desk. In the living room, she opened the old cabinet beneath the record player, stacks of vinyls, as expected. But behind them, she found something tucked between the boards. A small photo album. The first picture was of her at age 4, wearing rain boots indoors and holding a spoon like a microphone. His handwriting on the edge said, "Future singer or spoon thief, both acceptable." Page after page, the album chronicled her life in moments no one else had captured. Her first time riding a bike. Her face after losing her first tooth. Her standing at the school play with her costume crooked and proud. And at the very back, the last photo. Clara, age 21, sitting on the porch of his house, staring at the sky. He had written just one word underneath. Peace. She pressed her hand against the page. He had seen everything. She just hadn't known he was watching. She walked into the kitchen, opened the drawer next to the sink, and found a tin box. Inside were notes, tiny ones, on scraps of paper. Clara likes blueberries more than strawberries. Remember this. Ask her about her dream job. She once said something about books and helping people. Don't forget, Tuesday is her final exam. Leave her a note of encouragement. Dozens of them. private reminders. As if loving her had become his most sacred task, she sank into the kitchen chair, holding the box in her lap, tears slipping silently down her face. All those years, she thought. She was just visiting him, keeping the old man company, but he had been watching her grow, learning her, writing her into his life in ways no one else ever had. And suddenly, the money, the journal, the bracelets, they all meant something different now. They weren't about value. They were about devotion. He had been building a legacy. That wasn't about inheritance. It was about intention. A way to tell her, in all the ways he never quite could with words, you were always loved. You were always seen. You were always mine. She stayed in that house until the sun began to set, and before she left, she wrote one small note of her own, folded it, and placed it in the tin box. I see you now, Grandpa. I see everything. Then she locked the door behind her, and for the first time since his death, she didn't feel lost. She felt found. Clara thought the journal had told her everything. But 2 days later, as she sat flipping through its pages for what felt like the 10th time, her fingers brushed something unfamiliar, something taped between 2 pages near the back. It was a small, folded square of paper, slightly thicker than the journal sheets. She peeled it open. Inside was a hand-drawn sketch, a map, rough but unmistakable. It depicted the backyard of her grandfather's house, the garden, the old shed, the tree with the tire swing she'd used as a child. But one section was circled in red ink, a patch of ground behind the shed, marked only with a single word: dig. Clara stared at the map, her heart thudding. He'd left her a message, not just words this time, a direction, a hidden place. She didn't wait. That afternoon she returned to his house, shovel in hand, pulse racing with something between nervousness and awe. The autumn air was crisp, the ground damp beneath her boots. The space behind the shed hadn't changed in years. Overgrown with ivy and dandelions, half forgotten, she knelt down, placed the tip of the shovel into the earth, and began to dig. 6 inches in, the metal struck something solid. Wood. Her breath caught. She cleared away the dirt with her hands and uncovered a small wooden box, locked with a latch but not sealed. Inside, another envelope, a flash drive, and a single key. The envelope was addressed simply, Clara, only after the journal. She opened it with trembling hands. You found it. I hoped you would. You always did love a mystery, even when you pretended you didn't. This is the final piece. A few things I couldn't write down. Some memories I wanted you to hear in my voice. The flash drive holds a video. It's not fancy. I recorded it on an old camera I kept hidden in my study drawer. If you're watching it, then I'm already gone. And I'm sorry for that, but there's something else you need to know. Use the key. Open the blue chest in the attic, the one I always said was just tools. It never was. Clara sat frozen for a moment. A flash drive, a key, a message from a man who had planned all of this without saying a word. She drove home in silence and inserted the flash drive into her laptop. The video began with a bit of static. Then his face appeared. Older than she remembered, eyes tired but kind. Hi, kiddo, he said, smiling gently. If you're watching this, then I guess I finally ran out of time. He paused. I've never been good at saying things out loud. I always thought the right gesture meant more than 1,000 words. But there were still things I needed you to hear from me, not just read. He looked down for a moment, then back at the camera. You were the best part of my life, and I don't say that lightly. You made me want to be better, so I started planning for you early on. Not because I thought you needed anything, but because I knew one day you'd wonder who I really was. He took a breath. And the truth is, I wasn't always proud of the man I used to be. I made mistakes, hurt people I cared about, stayed silent when I should have spoken up. But when you came into this world, I knew I had a second chance to do one thing right. The screen faded to black, but his voice continued. Go to the attic, Clara. There's one last thing waiting for you. She didn't wait until morning. Within the hour, she was back at the house, climbing the creaky wooden ladder to the attic. The space smelled of dust and pine wood. Light filtered through a small window, and in the corner sat the blue chest, just as he'd described. She had seen it 100 times as a child and never questioned it. He always said it was just tools. She knelt and turned the key. Inside were dozens of folders, all neatly labeled. Medical documents, letters, photos, notes he'd written to himself, records of everything he'd done to prepare for her future, investments, donations, a handwritten timeline of every financial decision he made over 20 years. It was meticulous, purposeful, and then, tucked beneath it all, a manila envelope marked, "Medical, do not open until after I'm gone." Clara hesitated. She opened it slowly. Inside was a letter from his doctor. Diagnosis: Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Date: 2 years ago. Her breath caught. He'd known. For 2 years. He'd been dying, and told no one. She read further. He'd refused aggressive treatment. Chose not to burden the family. Had told his doctor he wanted quality of life, not quantity. And in those 2 years, he had prepared all of this. The journal, the money, the clues, the messages, not for pity, but for her. So she would know the man he truly was, not the silent one she remembered at family dinners, but the one who watched her grow, who planned for her joy, who died with his heart, full, knowing she would carry his name with pride. Clara sat in the attic, the letter in her lap, the air thick with dust and emotion. She whispered aloud into the quiet, "I understand now." And she did, because this wasn't just an inheritance. It was a legacy, a love letter that had taken decades to write, and now, finally, she was ready to receive it. Clara didn't sleep that night. The attic felt too full of ghosts, and her mind raced with everything she had uncovered. Her grandfather had been dying for 2 years. He'd known his time was short, and yet he spent every ounce of it preparing not just a gift, but a message, a map, a mosaic of love that unfolded only after his death. She brought the contents of the attic home with her, the files, the envelope, the notes, and the flash drive. She needed to hear his voice again. This time, she set the laptop on her nightstand, turned off every light, and pressed play. The screen flickered to life. There he was again, seated in the armchair she remembered from his study. A small lamp behind him cast a warm glow, and his hands rested gently on his knees. He looked straight into the camera. "I never liked cameras," he began. "Always thought they made me look older than I felt. But I wanted to talk to you, Clara. Just you." He gave a soft, tired smile. "By now you've read the journal, found the key, maybe even opened the box upstairs. So you know, don't you? About the cancer." Clara nodded, though he couldn't see her. "I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want the last part of my life to be about dying. I wanted it to be about giving, about making something meaningful for you." He shifted slightly, his voice quiet but steady. "I spent a lot of years being a man who did the bare minimum. I provided. I showed up, but I rarely saw the people I loved, and I was good at pretending that was enough." A pause. Then, "You changed that." He looked down, gathering his thoughts. "I remember the first time I held you. You were wrapped in this absurd pink blanket that made you look like a cotton ball, and you stared at me like I was the only person in the world. No judgment, no expectation, just belief. You believed in me before I believed in myself." He leaned forward slightly. "And I know the world doesn't always make space for love like that. Quiet love, steady love. It gets overlooked. People expect grand gestures, but I was never a grand gesture kind of man. So I left you breadcrumbs, stories, keys, not to confuse you, but to show you I thought about all of this, about you." Picked up something off camera and held it up. Clara's childhood drawing of a tree with hearts hanging from every branch. "You gave me this when you were 6, told me it was a family tree of love. I didn't know what to say. I still don't, but it stuck with me. So I made you a real one. Every dollar, every note, Every recorded moment, a branch. He set the picture down and his tone changed slightly. I know you may have questions. About your mother. About why I wasn't better. Why I wasn't louder. With my affection. He paused, as if deciding whether to go deeper. The truth is, I didn't know how. My own father never said, I love you. Not once. And for the longest time, I thought showing emotion was weakness. I thought that if I loved you quietly, you'd still understand. He looked into the lens again, eyes misty. But you deserved more than silence. Clara wiped a tear from her cheek. I hope you forgive me for not saying it sooner, but I need you to hear it now. He sat straighter, his voice steadied. I love you, Clara. I loved you from the first time you kicked your legs at me in that ridiculous pink blanket. I loved you when you brought home that awful poetry in 8th grade and made me read it out loud. I loved you every time you doubted yourself, and I couldn't find the words to make it stop. He smiled through his tears. And I love you still, beyond whatever screen you're watching this on, beyond the letters and the money and the clues. None of that was the point. You were the point. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A key. This is the last one. The very last. The screen cut to black, then faded in again, showing a close-up of a small wooden box she hadn't seen before, different from the one in the attic. The video ended there. Clara stared at the screen, stunned. She knew that box. It was in the bedroom. Closet. Old. Dusty. She always thought it held spare keys or random screws. She rushed across the room and pulled it down from the top shelf. The key from the flash drive case slid in perfectly. Inside was a letter. Short. Simple. This box held my wedding ring after your grandmother died. I never thought I'd open it again. But then you came along. And suddenly I had something to live for again. Don't let the world make you small, Clara. You were born to give, to lead, to heal. Use what I left you to build something. Anything. Just make it count. And if ever you doubt your worth, remember, I never did. Clara folded the letter to her chest and sank to the floor, sobbing, not out of sadness, but because for the first time in her life, she felt full, seen, carried. Her grandfather hadn't left her with instructions. He left her with belief. And now it was her turn to do something with it. The dining room table had never felt so long. Clara sat at one end, her fingers clasped together, her back straight, heart pounding behind a calm expression. Around her sat her mother, 2 aunts, her Uncle Henry, and a few cousins, all summoned by a simple group text. I need to talk to you, it's about Grandpa. They came expecting answers about the will, or maybe to confirm what some already suspected, that Clara had inherited more than anyone else, that the old man had favorites, that the quiet granddaughter, always so polite, had somehow become the center of it all. But they didn't know. Not yet. She took a breath and began. I know some of you had questions after the funeral about what Grandpa left me, and I want to tell you the truth. Her mother shifted in her seat, uneasy. Clara continued. He didn't just leave me money. He left me a story, a journal, instructions, letters, a video, and a purpose. Her aunt raised an eyebrow. A purpose? Yes, Clara said, voice firm but warm. He planned this for years, quietly, intentionally, because he wanted to leave something meaningful, not just for me, but through me. Uncle Henry leaned forward. How much did he leave you? Clara paused. $3 million. A collective gasp. Mouths opened. Some eyes narrowed. What? A cousin muttered. Are you serious? Why just you? Another cousin asked. That's not fair. We're family too. Clara remained calm. She had prepared for this, because I was the only one he prepared it for. He started setting it aside before I was even in high school. It wasn't about favoritism. It was about something he carried inside him, regret mostly. And love he didn't know how to show until it was too late. Her mother's eyes softened. What? Do you mean regret? She asked quietly. Clara turned to her, then gently placed the journal on the table. He wrote pages and pages about you. About how he failed you as a father, how he didn't know how to connect, how he thought providing was enough until it wasn't. Her mother's lips trembled. I never knew, she whispered. He didn't want you to, Clara replied. He didn't want you to carry his guilt. But he wanted me to understand it, to learn from it, to break the pattern. Another cousin scoffed. And he thought giving you $3 million would do that? No, Clara said. The money was never the point. It's what he wrapped around it. Letters, memories, puzzles. He left me, himself, his heart, his final years, and something else too. She reached into her bag and pulled out the medical folder. He was dying. Silence. She unfolded the diagnosis and slid it forward. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. Diagnosed 2 years ago. Gasps rippled around the room. He didn't tell anyone, Clara said. Not one of you. Not even me. He chose to keep it hidden. He said he didn't want to be seen as the dying man. He wanted to live out what time he had left doing something that mattered. Aunt Elaine covered her mouth. Her eyes welled with tears. I saw him last Christmas, she whispered. He laughed with the girls, carved the turkey. You're telling me he was dying? Clara nodded. He smiled through it, because he didn't want the weight of his pain to fall on us. So instead he spent his time writing letters, recording, messages, putting together this treasure map, for me, for all of us in a way. But he didn't trust us, someone murmured. That's what it was. He trusted you. No, Clara said gently. He believed in me. That's different. He believed I would understand, that I would do something with it, that I wouldn't treat it like an inheritance, but like a responsibility. She looked around the room. I'm not here to gloat, or to defend him. I'm here because this story isn't just his and mine. It belongs to all of us now. He was your father, your brother, your uncle, and maybe you didn't get the chance to know him the way I did these last few months. But if you want to, I'll share it all. Every letter, every page, every recording. Silence lingered. Then her mother spoke. Can I read the journal? Clara slid it across the table. Her mother opened to the first page and ran her fingers over his handwriting. Others leaned in slowly. Eyes softened, arms loosened. Because beneath the questions and the initial jealousy was something deeper, a longing to know the man they had already said goodbye to. And maybe, just maybe, a desire to forgive him too. That night, as the family lingered longer than they had in years, sharing stories and rereading his words aloud, Clara understood the true gift her grandfather had left. Not money, not even memory, but connection, a second chance, not just for him, but for all of them. It was the smallest envelope Clara had found so far, tucked in the back of the journal, behind, a taped page and almost hidden in the binding. No name, no instructions, just her grandfather's familiar handwriting in the top corner. Open only when you've found everything. She stared at it for a long time. She had read every page, unlocked every box, watched every recording. She'd uncovered his diagnosis, understood the reason behind his silence, and shared his story with the family. And still, something about this envelope made her hands tremble. Clara sat on the floor of her apartment, the journal beside her, the letter in her lap. She turned it over twice, then slowly peeled it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. She unfolded it. Clara, by now you've walked farther into my story than anyone else ever has. You've read my fears, my shame, my love. You've seen who I tried to be and who I failed to become. And if you're reading this, it means you stayed until the very end. Thank you. The first few lines already made her chest tighten. She kept reading. There's something I never told anyone, not even your mother. And I couldn't bring myself to say it in the video or write it in the journal, because it still scares me, even now. But you deserve to know. When your grandmother passed, I broke in ways no one saw. I smiled through the funeral, helped with the arrangements, made jokes in the kitchen. And then, when everyone left, I fell apart. I became someone else. Someone angry, withdrawn. I stopped calling your mother. I stopped seeing my friends. I drank too much. I closed every window in the house and let the dust settle around me like I'd already died. And then you were born. Clara felt a tear roll down her cheek. I didn't want to visit at first. I made excuses, said I had work to do, said I didn't want to get in the way. The truth was, I didn't believe I could care about anything again. But your mother brought you over anyway. You were tiny, loud, completely unaware that I was drowning. And then you laughed. One loud, ridiculous baby laugh, at my shoes, of all things. And I cracked open. I felt something move inside me that hadn't moved in months. And that night, I sat down with a cup of tea and started writing the journal you found. That laugh saved me, Clara. You saved me. She covered her mouth with her hand, holding in a sob. So I started planning. I didn't know if I'd live long enough to see you grow, but I wanted to make sure that if you ever felt lost, if you ever wondered if you mattered, you'd have proof. Not just words, but decisions, actions, a trail of love. Because I didn't just want to be remembered. I wanted you to know that I remembered you, every version of you, every birthday, every drawing, every time you looked at me with those big eyes, full of questions I didn't yet know how to answer. Clara rested her head against the wall, letting the letter shake in her hands. He had never said any of this aloud. He had never needed to. But seeing it now, in ink, undeniable, unerasable, it made the weight of his silence make sense. The hardest part of dying wasn't the pain. It was knowing I'd never get to see what kind of woman you'd become. But now I know that if you've made it this far, you're the kind of woman who doesn't turn away from truth, who doesn't flinch at sorrow, who carries love like a compass. You're stronger than me, Clara, and that's all I ever wanted. So, here is my final truth. You weren't just my granddaughter. You were my redemption. With love beyond time, Grandpa Clara pressed the letter to her chest. She didn't cry this time, not fully, because grief and grace were now sitting side by side in her heart. The sadness of loss, yes, but also the fullness of understanding, of being chosen, of being deeply, unconditionally loved by a man who had spent his final years crafting a path just for her to walk. She stood slowly, placed the letter back into the envelope, and set it on the bookshelf beside the journal. Not to hide it, but to honor it. This was no longer just a family story. It was a legacy, and soon she would decide what to do with it. But for tonight, she would sit in the quiet and let her grandfather's final words echo gently in her chest. You were my redemption. Clara hadn't planned to return to the care facility. She thought she had uncovered everything, every note, every clue, every emotion he'd hidden in boxes and journals and digital recordings. But something tugged at her after reading that final letter, a whisper in her gut. There was one piece left, the ending. So she drove to Hearthlight. It was a warm, quiet place on the edge of town. Nothing sterile or cold like most facilities. Her grandfather had chosen it himself, paid for it in full, left no burden for anyone else. As she walked in, a receptionist looked up with a soft smile. "Can I help you?" Clara hesitated. "My grandfather stayed here, Walter Pearson. He passed about 6 weeks ago." The woman's expression softened further. "Yes, I remember him. Quiet man. Always wore that navy sweater. You must be Clara." Clara blinked. "How did you know?" "He spoke about you. Often." She motioned to a small lounge area and disappeared for a few minutes. When she returned, another woman was with her, older, dressed in pale blue scrubs, with kind eyes and silver hair pulled into a bun. "This is Grace," the receptionist said. She was with him the most in his final weeks. Clara stood. "Thank you for seeing me." Grace gave a gentle nod. "He asked me to, if you ever came." They sat together on a soft bench near the window. Outside, autumn leaves drifted lazily from the trees. He didn't talk much about his illness, Clara said. Not to us. Grace smiled softly. He didn't talk much to anyone. Except about you. Clara looked down. What did he say? Grace took a moment, then replied. He said you were his compass. That you reminded him of where he should have been heading all along. Clara's chest tightened. He had this little routine, Grace continued. Every morning, after I brought him tea, he'd take out that small leather journal, the one you probably have now, and he'd run his fingers over the cover before opening it. Sometimes he didn't write. He just touched it, like it grounded him. Clara nodded. It did. Grace's voice softened. He used to ask me what day it was, and I'd tell him. Then he'd say, that means Clara's doing something wonderful somewhere. And then he'd smile and close his eyes for a while. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. I didn't know he thought about me so much. Grace reached out and held her hand gently. You were the only thing he talked about with certainty. He didn't dwell on pain or fear. He spoke about your smile. The way you used to spin in circles when you were a little girl. The time you wrote him a poem about dinosaurs and grief. Clara laughed, choked by tears. I remember that. It made no sense. He kept it, Grace said. Had it taped, inside the drawer next to his bed. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Clara asked, was he scared? Grace looked out the window. No, not scared, just full, like someone who had finished a story. He told me he had said everything he needed to, even if the people he loved hadn't heard it yet. He trusted they would. Clara wiped her cheeks. On his last night, Grace added, he asked to see the stars, so we wheeled him outside just past midnight. He barely spoke, but he kept looking up. She paused, and then he whispered something. I had to lean close to hear it. Clara waited. He said, I hope she knows I never stopped watching over her. Clara covered her mouth with both hands, her body shaking with quiet sobs. Grace waited patiently, gave her space. Let the silence speak. When Clara finally looked up, eyes red but clear, she said, thank you for being there, for knowing him when we didn't. Grace smiled. He left nothing unsaid, Clara. Not really. He just said it in his own way. Clara nodded. As she stood to leave, Grace reached into her pocket. He asked me to give you this, if you ever came. It was a small metal pin, round with an engraved image of a tree and the words, rooted in love. I found it in his hand the night he passed, Grace said. He held it all day. Clara took it gently and closed her fingers around it. That night, back at home, she placed the pin on her desk beside the journal. She sat in silence for a long time, hands resting in her lap, thinking about his last night under the stars, about the way he chose to leave, not with noise or attention, but with memory, with intention. He hadn't just planned a goodbye. He had written a whole farewell in actions, stitched across time, waiting for her to arrive. And now she had. Morning, the idea came to her. Clara was sitting at her grandfather's old writing desk. She had brought it home from his house after everything was settled. It still smelled faintly of cedar and pipe tobacco, and the drawer handles felt smooth from decades of use. On the desk sat the journal, the pin, the locket, and the photograph of them together when she was 10. His hand resting gently on her shoulder, his smile small but genuine. She'd spent weeks reading and rereading the journal, listening again to the recording, turning the Tree of Love drawing into something more permanent. And now she knew. It wasn't just about honoring him. It was about building something. Something he would have built himself if he had the time, the strength, the courage. So she did. Clara used part of the inheritance to buy an old building downtown, a weathered but solid structure with large windows and high ceilings. She poured months into renovating it, cleaned every floorboard herself, chose the paint color for each room, hung photos of her grandfather in the hallway, young, old, smiling, serious. She even framed a page from his journal and placed it near the entrance. You don't need to speak loudly to be heard. You just need to speak with love. The name of the place? The Hearthlight Center, a space for people who, like her grandfather, had spent years holding back love. A center for the elderly, for young caregivers, for families disconnected by silence. A place where journaling was encouraged, where conversations were gently guided, where quiet people were finally listened to. She created rooms for reflection, one-on-one mentorship spaces, and even a small garden in the back with a tire swing, the same kind she had once used. The same kind he had fixed for her without saying a word. Word spread quickly. Volunteers came. Donations followed. Therapists offered time. Retired teachers and grandparents found a second life there, guiding, writing, connecting. It was quiet, but full, just like he would have wanted. On the center's opening day, Clara stood on the small porch out front, a ribbon across the stairs, and a modest crowd gathered below. She held the scissors in her hand, but paused before cutting. "I don't have a big speech," she said, her voice steady, warm. "Just a name I want to say." She looked up at the sky. "Walter Pearson, my grandfather. This is for you." She cut the ribbon, and a new chapter began. That night, alone in the center, she walked through each room slowly, breathing in the silence. She entered the writing room, a space lined with journals, each donated or provided, some already filled with early thoughts from visitors. At the far corner of the room was a small wooden box labeled "Letters You Wish You'd Sent." Inside were folded notes, anonymous and raw. Clara sat beside it, added her own. "Dear Grandpa, I built it. I built what you wanted to build. I gave them a place to speak softly and still be heard. I didn't spend it all. The money, I mean, most of it is still there. But what I spent gave life. It gave light. You didn't just leave me a gift. You left me a path. And now I see why you waited to tell me everything. Because I had to grow into it. Because I had to be ready. I am ready. I love you. Always." Clara. She folded the letter and slipped it into the box. Then she walked to the window, opened it, and looked up at the stars. "I hope you can see this," she whispered. Maybe he could. Maybe he couldn't. But either way, she knew. He had never truly left. He had become part of everything, every page, every brick, every heartbeat inside the walls of a building filled with stories once buried, now blooming. And for the first time since his passing, Clara didn't just feel like someone who had lost. She felt like someone who had found a future, calling, and a love that never stopped speaking, even in silence. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Have you ever uncovered a quiet love, a hidden letter, or a legacy that changed your life? We'd love to hear your story. And if you believe that love can speak even through silence, subscribe to Grandfather Great Love for more powerful true stories that honor the bonds that shape us.